When I was younger, me and my friends would always have big man hunting games in the snow. This wooden January night. We were 13, and there was this crazy blizzard going on. We continued our tradition. We had a group of 6 people playing, 3 in each team. This game was more or less tagged, but it involved hiding and running to an assigned safe point, which for us was the front stoop. It was fun in the summer, but the snow only made it so much better. But with the snow adding as a hiding and slowing down factor, hunting down footprints, and even using snowballs as weapons to slow down chasers, it was the most fun game of our childhoods until this particular year. Things turned pretty bad. It was our turn to hide. I'll give you the names of my teammates to make things more easy to follow: Dan and Christian. Dan hopped a fence to someone's backyard on the other side of the block, which wasn't really cheating, as we had no limits to this game. Christian jumped on top of my other friend's shed in the backyard and hid behind the sloped roof. I thought it'd be sneaky and started running all around the backyard to create seemingly endless trail of footprints. When our friends from the other side of the house announced that they were coming, I had to think quick. I did something that just wasn't too pleasant. First, I signaled for Christian on top of the roof to run if I were to run myself. And then I hopped in the bushes and laid flat in the snow. 2 of the others entered the backyard and started analyzing the crazy footprint paths I created. I knew it would lead to me, though, so I had to be ready to run if they got close. They were getting closer to the bushes I was hiding in. So Christian jumped down from the shed into the snow and darted for the front lawn. The 2 chased after him in both directions. I knew the stoop would be guarded right now, so I took this opportunity to better hide myself. I decided to follow Dan's approach and hopped onto the roof of the shed, then over the fence to the backyard on the other side of the block. I didn't see Dan anywhere, though. I looked for his footprints, but quickly found some other kind of tracks in the snow. By the fence were a few boot marks from where Dan must have landed. But then quickly the marks turned into a steady trail of something being pushed or dragged through the snow. I followed the trail to the back door of the pitch-black house, and then I stopped. I quickly put 2 and 2 together. My heart sank, and I turned and headed back to the fence to hop over and call for my friend's parents. But about halfway across the yard, I heard the sliding door of the house open and someone wearing a black coat with a hood covering in their face emerged and started stomping over to me. I screamed like a girl as I pulled myself over the fence, as I just barely making it. Before he could grab my legs, all of my friends came running to the backyard. Then shortly after, my friend's parents came out the back door. I told them what happened and the mom phoned the police while the dad stormed to the other side of the block with a gun and knocked on the door. There was no answer, so he let himself in. As we watched, the door was unlocked. He had his weight outside within a few minutes, came out with Dan in his arms. He was knocked out. His face looked red and wounded, as if he were hit in the face by a shovel or something. There was no car in the driveway, indicating the guy left when I escaped his yard. He never returned to his house, and I'm pretty sure he's still wanted to the police by this day. It just goes to show anybody out there, even your next door neighbor, may be a predator just waiting for an opportunity to strike. Now, if there's one thing that you should always do before going up a mountain is to make sure that you're prepared for anything. This one time, about a week and a half before my 27th birthday, I was celebrating a bit early with a couple of friends of mine. The 3 of us had saved up enough money to take a 2-week trip to Canada so that we could hit a few of the mountains up there. And honestly, it was beautiful at first. The way the snow was littered with small bits of green from the pine trees sticking out was like something you would see in the movies. Every second that we were there seemed exciting, and from the moment we landed we couldn't wait to get our boots on and hit the slopes. But we landed later in the day. We got off the plane and took a cab to the car rental service that we were using. And the worker there recommended that we get a truck so that we could carry all of our gear, which sounded perfect to me. And in no time at all, we were checking into our hotel room and planning out the next day. The following morning we all made sure to wake up early enough to grab a quick bite to eat on our way to the mountain, and within the first hours of being up, we were all happily tearing through the snow. It was perfect. The snow on the ground wasn't packed down too tight, and the snow falling around us made it seem like we showed up at the right time. Little did we know the snow we were seeing was actually the outer edge of a blizzard that was heading right toward us. The weather turned faster than I had ever seen before, and without a second of notice. The sky was a deep gray, and the snow was coming down much faster, limiting our visibility. We all met up in one spot and decided to call it a day, and one by one we began heading down the mountain. I had been skiing the longest and could help anyone if they needed it, so I decided to position myself in the back of the line in case anyone fell. However, as we made our way down the mountain toward our truck, the visibility only continued to get worse, and even though I thought I was following behind the group, I somehow managed to veer a bit off course and smacked right into a small tree that was poking out of the snow. I felt the wind knock out of me as I made contact with the tree and began tumbling forward. I hoped that my skis would just unclip as I hit the snow, but that wasn't the case. At one point as I was rolling through the snow, my left ski dug into the snow, and as my body continued to fly forward, I felt something in my leg snap. I let out a piercing scream that luckily was able to cut through the storm and caught my friend's attention, who was in front of me. He turned and made his way over to me and immediately knew that I needed assistance ASAP. We agreed that he wouldn't be able to get me down on his own, so he decided to go and get help. I was laying in the ice-cold snow for about 45 minutes before I finally saw the light of an EMT riding on a snowmobile coming up the mountain. He slowly moved me onto a sled-like gurney that was attached to the back of his vehicle, and we made our way down the mountain. Once I had gotten to the hospital, the doctor had to cut through my snowsuit to get it off and reveal my leg. I almost passed out as I saw the small bit of shin bone piercing through the skin. I had gotten a compound fracture, and I don't know what hurt worse, the bone breaking or the doctor pushing it back into place. In total, it took me 6 months to heal, with a year of physical therapy on top of that. I'll never forget that trip. Living in New York, winter can be a fickle season depending on the year. While some winters feel as though they were entirely devoid of snow, others felt as if the snow wouldn't stop falling from the sky. Probably the worst snowfall I had ever experienced is during the blizzard of 2005. That year there must have been at least 4.5 feet or more of snow piled up after the 3-day storm had finally ended. I had just turned 19 and moved into a small 2-bedroom house with a friend of mine from high school, and honestly, the first day it snowed was a bunch of fun. We played in the snow with our neighbors' kids like a couple of overgrown children, and then even had hot chocolate after warming up inside. However, everything started to take a turn for the worst after waking up the following morning. Initially we had expected the snow to stop at some point overnight, and though we loaded the idea of shoveling the driveway, we figured the roads would be good enough for us to drive to work. But that wasn't the case at all. At some point throughout the night our power went out, which was later discovered was due to freezing power lines. And when I looked out my bedroom window, not only did I realize that it hadn't stopped snowing, but I was awestruck by the amount that had accumulated overnight. In just the first 24 hours alone, it looked like almost 3 feet had piled up, and as far as we could tell there was no sign of any snowplows. My roommate and I couldn't reach out to our families because the power was out and neither of us had signed up for a cell phone plan yet, so until we managed to be dug out, we were on our own. By the time noon came around, the house had cooled down to the point where we could practically see our breath, and it almost seemed like the blankets weren't helping keeping in any of our body heat. But we did everything we could to just power through it, hoping that the power would be restored soon. That wasn't the case though, and as the sun went down, the house only grew colder. We lit a few emergency candles so that we could see and ate some cold-cut sandwiches for dinner as we held our hands over the candle's flame to keep warm. It didn't help much though, and by that point I would have given anything to get warm. The rest of the night was tough and we got hardly any sleep. Almost every second was spent hoping that the light, and more importantly the heat, would kick on. And on the morning of the 3rd day of the storm I had an idea that to this day might be one of the dumbest things I've ever done. You see, when I woke up that morning I noticed my car keys sitting on the coffee table, and I thought that I could somehow make my way out of the house and into my car. I might be able to turn it on and heat it up for a little while. Now that I'm a little bit wiser, I realized that most likely wouldn't have worked. But I never got to find out because as soon as I opened the front door, I saw that the snow had continued to pile in. Was now basically up to my chin. I didn't let that stop me though, so I put on the only pair of gloves I had, which were small and knitted poorly, and I began scooping the snow in as big of piles as I could and throwing it to the side. My process worked for about 5 minutes before my gloves had become entirely soaked, and had I stopped there, I might have been fine, but I decided to push on. I made it about 10 feet away from my front door before I basically dropped to my knees in pain. My hands had become so cold that they felt like they were on fire and being cut by a serrated blade. I made my way back into the house and took my gloves off to the most horrifying sight I had ever seen. From the fingertips down to just about the knuckle, almost all of my fingers had turned a deep purple, as if they were badly broken. I tried to warm them over an emergency candle, but that only made them hurt even more. And to make matters worse, there was no way that I could make it to the hospital by myself, and we had no way of calling for help. Thankfully, the power ended up being restored by around 11 p.m. And on that third night, shortly after the snow stopped coming down, the first thing we did was call 911, who was able to send an ambulance. Though it took them about 2 hours to get to the house. While we waited, we let our families know that we were okay. Aside from my hands, as soon as the paramedic took a look at my hand, they told me I was likely going to have nerve damage in my hand. But nothing prepared me for when the doctor told me that I was going to lose 2 fingers on my right hand, my thumb and index fingers. I suppose it could have been worse though. This day, one of my favorite outdoor activities has to be skiing. If I'm not skiing, there's no reason for me to be out in the snow.